Hi, I'm Dr. Tom Denning, better known to my students as Dr. D.
I'm Kate.
This podcast is about how we aren't trying to change the world, and we aren't letting the world change us. Today, what we want to talk about is a topic that I call the reluctant entrepreneur, and I happen to be one. I've been an entrepreneur since 1984, and I didn't become an entrepreneur because I knew what entrepreneurship was. In fact, I don't even think in 1984 that I was able to spell the word. Here I was in graduate school. I had a wife and a child, and I just needed to have some additional income. And so I kind of looked around to see what was available to me. There were jobs that were available, and I could have gone ahead and perhaps got some type of an hourly job. But, I didn't know that I was an entrepreneur. Nobody in my family had been an entrepreneur. And so I put the word out to my network that I was looking to start something up. And I was introduced to a gentleman who was some 20 years older than me. And he happened to be just finishing his Master of Public Health degree at the University of Minnesota. We were both in graduate school. And we started talking about his research and what it meant. His research actually was on the topic of whether or not there were human health effects from the electric and magnetic fields around high voltage power lines. Have you ever heard of that issue, Kate?
I have actually.
Yeah, it's a very obscure issue that happened to be very, very important back in the 1980s when we were having this discussion. And we thought to ourselves that perhaps we could bundle the information and the data that he had gathered in a unique way and sell it to the electric utility industry worldwide so that they could understand what this issue was all about. And so we started the business. He was, as I said, 20 years my senior, and he'd been an entrepreneur. And we started this little newsletter. And the newsletter had this really long name. It was called the Transmission, Distribution, Health and Safety Report. And transmission lines are the big power lines that you see going across the countryside that are usually put on these big pylons, and maybe sometimes you see them running up mountainsides and stuff. Those are transmission lines. They carry a lot of power. And the distribution lines are the ones that you see in your neighborhood. Perhaps you've got power poles in the neighborhood, or they run underground or whatever. And these things give off electric and magnetic fields. And so we thought, okay, this is kind of an interesting topic, and maybe we can, build a business around this by sending out this newsletter. So if you imagine, Kate, this is 1984. We didn't even have a computer back in 1984. And I remember, I think around 1988 or so, we got our first fax machine. So we really were grinding it out as entrepreneurs. We literally had to send out mass mailings to electric utility companies around the world. And I remember signing all these letters so that my signature eventually became just like a straight line, right? So you can't even read my name anymore on my signature because I was signing all these letters individually and then licking all these envelopes or using that thing to get the envelopes. And we'd have stacks and stacks of envelopes to do our marketing because there was no internet. There was no way for people to know that we existed and so on. So we started up this business, and I got to tell you, it was miserable. It was hard. I mean, he brought his wife into the business. And so the two of them sometimes would have, family arguments. And I was kind of the young guy. I tried to stay out of all that. And we just made it work. There were many days where we didn't know whether we were going to get paid. And there were many days when I thought I should just go get a job to take care of my family. And of course, I was in graduate school at the time and studying, of all things, philosophy, right? My undergrad was in the natural sciences. So I was kind of a reluctant entrepreneur in the sense that both of us, as a matter of fact, my partner's name was Bob. Both of us, he was in his late 40s and I was in my, mid to late 20s. We were constantly sending out resumes while we were still running this business because we didn't know that it was going to work, right? And so the thing that I learned in those early days starting this first business is that you never know. You really have to keep your eyes on the prize because you never know when the business is going to tip from being this grind day to day, you're stressed out, you're trying to figure things out, you're trying new things. Eventually, with factors that are completely unexpected, you might, in fact, suddenly have a great business on your hands. So I'm going to tell you how this happened to us, and I'll quickly get through this. But here we were grinding it out with this newsletter, and we were literally going to the library to find the data, the University of Minnesota library, where it was stored on microfiche. If anybody in the audience remembers what microfiche microfiche is. We literally had to read journal articles on these big machines looking at these tiny little pieces of microfiche. And so it was, the newsletter went out, and of course the world goes on, and we could only keep track of things with the technology that was available at the time, which was mostly the telephone. And of course, that's very, very limited. Well, it turned out that there was a major case that was going on in Houston, Texas, and the Houston Lighting and Power Company routed a 345 kilovolt transmission line across a 3-school complex. And the parents of the kids in these schools went bananas because they were concerned about the health and safety of their children. And they took it to a Texas court, and a Texas jury slapped HL&P with a major punitive damages award of $25 million, which was incredible at the time. This is the 1980s, right? And all of a sudden, every utility in the world realized that this was a real issue. So the point is, even as a reluctant entrepreneur, sometimes it's like the blind squirrel finds a nut, right? And here we were striving away, just grinding away every day. And suddenly something that happened across the country. We were in Minneapolis, and down in Houston is our phones absolutely lit up when that jury thing happened. So, Kate, that's kind of the story of the reluctant entrepreneur.
I'm curious. You say you're reluctant, but you really went in a different direction than what your studies were. Like, how did you have the confidence to make that jump? I'm just curious to know more about that.
Sure. So I'm a misfit, right? So I'm this nerdy misfit. I spend all my time. You can see the library behind me. This is my home library. And I spent all my time in the library. And I knew that that's where I felt the most comfortable. So I had to find a way where I could use the things that I was, good at, which was analysis and writing and those kinds of things, to find a way to make money. And I just couldn't do anything else. I tried other kinds of things. I just could not do it. And in the next segment, I want to talk about some of those other jobs that I tried and how many days, in some cases, I was able to stay on the job before I absolutely had to quit and move on.
I love that, Tom. I think a lot of us can resonate with that.
So, Kate, as I mentioned, I'm a reluctant entrepreneur. And I've got to tell you, I have tried throughout my early life. I tried to fit into regular jobs that I looked around, of course, and I saw other people doing jobs. Now, why can't I do a job like that? And I worked in a factory. I actually worked at Cola Company as a kid. And, I did that during the summers between semesters of college. But when I was finishing college, I thought I was going to, hopefully get a job like everybody else, and I was going to fit in somewhere. So I tried different things while I was in college. And so let me tell you about some of these things that are, I'm not proud of these jobs, but I guess I learned some things as a result of being involved in them. So the first one was I actually worked as a potato inspector. So you think about, what does that mean to be a potato inspector? So this was in central Wisconsin. I was going to a small college called the University of Wisconsin at Stevens Point. And it happens to be in an area where there were a lot of potatoes being grown by the farmers. And the United States Department of Agriculture, when it was harvest time, would set up in their great big, barns, you might call them, and the trucks would come in and dump off these potatoes. And I had to go and get a sample bin. I had a bin, and I'd get a sample of these potatoes, and I put them in a sack, and I had to label them. And that was my first sort of taste of being somebody in the agriculture industry. It wasn't a good fit, as you can imagine, Kate. So then, right, the next thing so I quit that, and I said, okay, I don't want to be a potato guy for the rest of my life. So then I needed money, right? So because I bought this fancy little MG midget car because I love having convertibles, right? But I didn't have any money, so I forced myself into a situation where I had to get a job. So the next job I got was at, guess this, a laundromat. And this was this was not your average This was I guess it's not even it was a laundry. So this was like a company that did industrial laundry, right? And here I was, I'd have to get in there like 5:00 in the morning. And Kate, this was in fact, the late 1970s, around 1979. And if you could imagine, I'd get in there 5:00 in the morning, and one of our clients was local hospitals. So they would have big piles of hospital sheets And this was before anybody had any concerns about health or welfare. And I've got to tell you, there were things in these hospital sheets that would just, I mean, I think back on it today and I think, my God, how did I put up with that? I mean, can you imagine that, right? I mean, I literally peel these things apart. I don't want to make our audience sick or anything, but that's what I did back in the 1970s, right? So I learned. Every time you're doing one of these things, you're learning what you don't want to do, right?
That is true. Yeah.
Don't you think that's just as important to learn what you don't want to do as it is what you do want to do?
Much easier lessons.
Yeah. So now potatoes were out and laundry is out. I don't want to do those two things, right? And I didn't want to go back to the factory, although that was always a fallback. But I got to tell you, most of the people I met that were, long-term lifers there were not all that happy. Kohler's a great company, but, sometimes factory work can be kind of a grind. So anyway, so off to college we go, and college for me was just kind of a nerdy time and everything. And during that time, I got another job. I thought, okay, this will be interesting. So this one was chain link fencing. I spent a summer and more working for a company called Security Fence. We were putting up chain link fencing. You ever put up chain link fencing, Kate?
My husband, he did that for many years. Yeah. Okay.
So you know what that is, right? So if you put up chain link fencing around, let's say a tennis court or a softball field or something, that height of that fence is 10 feet. And the roll of that material is 50 feet long. And these were 2-person crews that went out, and you literally had to grab this stuff and throw it up against the poles and then strap it as fast as you could so that it didn't fall back on top of you, right? And not being very mechanical, I suddenly realized that I wasn't going to be in the fencing business for the rest of my life. So what do you do when you're kind of this nerdy, bookish, library, loving kind of a person, and you've tried all these things, tried to fit in? Well, I continued to go down that path thinking I had to find some kind of a normal thing. So then the next thing I tried when I just began graduate school was I thought, well, I can sell cars. I like cars, right? So maybe I'll sell cars. So I went in and interviewed for a job at a Lincoln Mercury dealer in Minneapolis. And I got to tell you, I lasted 2 days on that job. So now this is the time in my life where it got down to the 2-day stints where I realized fast enough. I'm starting to get quicker, right? Now I realize in 2 days, I can't do this. The next thing I tried was, we call it executive recruiting or a headhunter. Guess how long I lasted in that job, Kate?
4 days.
2 days. 2 days. You might say 4 days if you included I had to listen to all these audio tapes about how to sell and everything prior to my first day on the job there. So that was kind of interesting. So as a result of all that, then I realized, right, that I had to go and find some way to use what I was becoming in a unique way that nobody was offering a job for. And so I had to become an entrepreneur. I became the reluctant entrepreneur and started, as I mentioned in the topic before, that we started this business with the newsletter and then serving the electric utility industry worldwide, which we built over the years into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. We ran that for 7 years together, and I sold my interest in 1991. My partner Bob continued for a number of years after that, and eventually he dissolved the business and retired, and he did very well for himself. That's the story, basically, of the reluctant entrepreneur. So you think about, so that puzzled me then, because after that, when I sold my interest in that business, I became the assistant dean of the business school at the University of Houston, right? So think about this, Kate. I mean, how many people does this happen to? I was 34 years old, had never been in a business school in my life, and I was selected to become the assistant dean of the business school at the University of Houston, where they had 6,000 students and 150 faculty, and I'd never been in a business course in my life, never been in a business school in my life. That was a learning experience. And while there, we started one of the first centers for entrepreneurship in the country. And ever since then, in 1992, I've been trying to figure out how it is that people become entrepreneurs. And that's what I want to talk about in the next segment of our show. So the next thing I'd like to talk about is something that we've been studying for maybe about the last 10 years. I've got a colleague, Dr. Matt Metzger here, that is published with me on some of this stuff. And it really is a personal reflection on how the hell I became an entrepreneur. and how I became, a professor. Here I am, a chaired professor of business in a business school. And I've never taken a business course in my life, never sat in a business classroom. So everything I've learned about business has been on the street, right? In entrepreneurship, starting ventures and working with other entrepreneurs and so on. And so as I'm teaching entrepreneurship, I've written a bunch of books on entrepreneurship, textbooks and things like that I use. Also, for a while, I was teaching at Arizona State University in the engineering school. I was teaching technology entrepreneurship there. And it's like, how does somebody become an entrepreneur? It's not like you sit down and write a business plan. Kate, I've never written a business plan prior to starting a business. And as a matter of fact, I'm involved in a home improvement company, and my partner and I were talking yesterday. We're 3 years into this thing, and we're about to go and talk to a banker about a line of credit and everything. And we need to write a business plan, right? So 3 years after we start. And that's not the typical kinds of things that people talk about when they talk about entrepreneurship. They think, I got to sit down and write a business plan, and I've never done that. So I just do it, right? You start going out there and find out what you can do. So given that, as I reflected back on my career, which I said before, started in 1984 as an entrepreneur. We started the first Center for Entrepreneurship in 92, and I've been trying to figure out how to teach this thing for the last 30 years, right? And we came down to the conclusion that really it's something that kind of happens to people at different times in your life. I mean, I'm an entrepreneur, but I'm not always involved in starting a company, right? Sometimes I'm between companies, and yet at the same time, people say, "Oh, you're an entrepreneur," right? Not because of the things I'm currently doing, but maybe things that I've done in the past or intend to do into the future. So we boiled it down to, it's not so much that you have a mindset or that you're born to be an entrepreneur. No, it's something that you practice every single day that leads to these entrepreneurial opportunities. And wouldn't you like to know what they are, Kate?
I would love to know what they are. And I think there's a lot of people out there today not taking the traditional college business school routes. So yes. I think there's a great interest
Very
in
encouraging.
About that.
Very encouraging. So what we learned is that the entrepreneurial mindset is something that evolves over time. So obviously the mindset that I had in 1984 when we were starting our first company has evolved dramatically to today, where I have different types of business ventures that I've started and am currently involved in and so on. And it's just easier now than it was in 1984. So something has changed, and it was a function of my commitments that I made in my life. And so what we have discovered is that entrepreneurship is a function of practicing 5 fundamental, what we call entrepreneurial virtues, right? And sometimes the notion of a virtue is really something that people misunderstand, as if it's, something that has to be associated with like a religious belief, or, it's some kind of a stone tablet or something like that. No, it's not. It's every one of us practices certain virtues. Sometimes they just kind of happen to us based on the environment that we grew up in. But you can intentionally decide which virtues you'd like to practice in your life and allow them then to provide you with different types of opportunities and options that will come your way. So a virtue is a consistent positive action in the world, right, Kate? I mean, if I told you, Kate, hey, I want to be an honest person, right? So honesty is a virtue, isn't it, Kate?
Sure is.
Right? So if I said, I want to practice the virtue of honesty. So would you call me an honest person if I just practiced it anytime it was just convenient for me?
Not at all. No,
of course not. Right. So you'd say, oh, you're kind of a person I wouldn't trust, because you're only honest when it pays off for you. And when it doesn't, then you're not honest. So you're not honest unless you're consistent about it. Right. And then it's a positive thing because it's something that you embrace. It's something that you freely choose to do. It's a positive, and honesty is generally considered to be kind of a positive virtue. Right, Kate? I mean, you would agree with that, wouldn't you?
I would. You said something interesting there, that positive action piece. Can you elaborate that on a little bit more? There's a lot out there on mindsets, but not much on virtues.
Yeah. So mindsets evolve through action in the world, right? So action in the world means I've chosen to do this. and sometimes it means that it might be inconvenient for me to be an honest person. You know that, right? If you came to the show today, Kate, and your hair was looking kind of bad, and you said, "Hey, Tom, how's my hair look today?" Right? And I said, "Oh, Kate, I've got to be an honest person. Doesn't look very good," right? So that would be inconvenient, but I'm consistent with my commitment to this, right? Now, of course, we all probably have a little bit of fudging that we do from time to time to be nice, because obviously virtues are going to conflict from time to time, and it's action in the world, right? So it has an impact on other people, and I'm conscious of that impact. So consistent positive action in the world. Okay. So now let's think about what are the things that you do to develop your mindset as an entrepreneur by practicing virtues. What are those virtues? Well, the central virtue is to get up every single day. And as the first thing that comes to your mind is, how do I create value for other people today? That's how entrepreneurs think. How do I create value for other people today? We're not thinking about, am I getting my fair share? Oh gosh, is the world treating me the way it should? It's what do I control? What resources do I control? What talents do I have? And how do I go out in the world and create positive value for the people? That is the central virtue of an entrepreneur. The second virtue that stems from that is to pay attention to the marketplace and how the market is responding to the value that you're creating, right? So don't try to be an entrepreneur that imposes some type of a product or service upon the world. The market may go, meh, I'm not interested in what you're doing, right? You want to be an entrepreneur that listens to the market and adjusts and adapts and understands that the value creating process is iterative. The third virtue is honor your contracts and promises. This is incredibly important. This is the integrity piece, right? So the world of entrepreneurship is a very small world. And if you want to be an entrepreneur and you are going to be in the stream of commerce, engaging in transactions, if you do not live up to your promises and contracts, the word gets out pretty quickly. And it's going to be very difficult for people to continue to do business with you if you do not honor your contracts and promises. What happens to people that don't do that, Kate? What do you think?
They find someone else who will.
Yeah. And the people that end up that are on the other side of that are considered to be a lack of integrity. The only way to go back into business is to pack up and move to a place where nobody knows you and start all over again. But this time you better honor your contracts and promises. The fourth virtue is to be resourceful and optimistic. And this is what we call the entrepreneurial frontier, right? If you imagine, Lewis and Clark setting out on the frontier way back in the early part of the 19th century, where basically anything west of Missouri was frontier in the United States. Did they put together some type of a wagon train and have every possible resource that they might need to get all the way out to the Pacific Northwest and back? No, of course not. They packed some basic resources, certainly including firearms and things, and realized and had the optimism that they were going to be able to find the game that they needed to continue to eat, right? And the water that they needed to drink. And they went out and did it. And that's what the entrepreneur has to be able to do. You have to be resourceful, realize that you have more resources at your command than you possibly know at the moment, and optimistic that you're going to find the other resources that you need to continue to grow. And then the fifth virtue, finally, is to be resilient and be able to rebound from failure. And entrepreneurs are going to fail. And if you develop that ability to be resilient, and the one little bromide that I provide my students is start thinking in the face of failure, recognize that businesses fail, but the entrepreneur goes on. The business may have to dissolve, but the entrepreneur goes on. In fact, Kate, the research is very, very clear. People that fail, entrepreneurs that fail and open up another venture are far more likely to succeed with the second one. And so ability to persist beyond the single failure is incredibly important in the world of entrepreneurship. So those are our 5 virtues that we have found to be essential to practice day by day by day. And you don't know when, or you don't know where, and you don't know how, but eventually you will stumble upon the opportunity to start a company.
When you think back to your personal journey and how you got to where you are today, is there one of the 5 virtues that came more naturally to you than the others? Or do they all just fit together like a puzzle?
I think that central virtue, to create value for the people, is just something I've always been very interested in doing. And that's what I do every day. I do. I wake up every day and I say, how do I use myself to create value for other people today? And that keeps me busy. It keeps me engaged. It keeps me on what I think is the positive side of life. I don't wake up wondering if I'm going to get my fair share. I want to be on my deathbed. And the only regret I want to have is that I don't get to live to see tomorrow. I don't want to have any regrets about the past.
Can you speak a little bit more about how someone who might be feeling like a misfit, feeling like, hey, I've given it an old college try to be an employee, and I want to try to make that jump. What are some of the ways that they might see the values play out in their future?
Right. So I think in that case, that's me. Right. That's me. And you really have to have the staying power. You might have to work some crappy jobs along the way. I work crappy jobs but at the same time that you're working those crappy jobs, you're trying to use yourself in your own unique way to create value for other people. And hopefully somewhere along the way, you're going to stumble upon these opportunities. Again, you don't know when, you don't know where, and you don't know how, and you don't know who you're going to meet. But just like actors are waiting tables sometimes before they get their big opportunity to be in a movie and become a star. Entrepreneurs are doing the same thing. Whether you're a musician, whether you're, you want to start a restaurant, whatever it is that you want to do, right? Make sure that you have the resilience, the determination, and the patience to wait through the rough times to get to the point where you're actually going to have an opportunity to start your own venture.
Well, I'll tell you what, Tom, your entrepreneurial virtues, that concept was life-changing for me. And now that I think about creating value every day for people, it's made me brave enough, curious enough to try new things. Now, Tom, I can't help but notice that big library there behind you. Can you give us a selection from the Misfits Library, something that our audience can take with them?
Sure. I do have one selected today. And this book, as a matter of fact, was a life changer for me. I don't know if I mentioned before, but as an undergrad, I was studying the natural sciences. And so physics and chemistry, and I have a minor in biology. And I guess I was interested. This is my nerdy side, Kate. I'm sorry, but, I always thought that there was, absolute knowledge out there that, and I could never figure out why people would argue about what was true and what was false and so on. But there's got to, it's in the science books. It's got to be. If it's in the science books, it's got to be, why are we arguing? Right. So I couldn't reconcile that. So then I went to study philosophy and I got another major in philosophy as undergrad. And it was beginning to answer some of those questions about how people know what they know. It's called epistemology. But then I went to grad school to study philosophy, of all things. And it was interesting. I had a lot of good courses, a lot of good professors there at the University of Minnesota, but it was still the library that was my salvation. And one day I was going through the library and I came across Richard Rorty's book called Consequences of Pragmatism. And I thought, oh, okay, that's American pragmatism. William James and John Dewey are famous for that. And so here's a contemporary author who happened to become quite famous for his writing, Richard Rorty, and changed my life. And I became a pragmatist, realizing that all knowledge is provisional, that the utility of what we believe is the only measure of its value, that we don't need to strive for some type of perfect knowledge, that people will have different perspectives. And that's the beauty of life, and that's the beauty of being a misfit, is that you can literally have a completely different perspective on the world of anybody else, but you don't have to change the world in order to find a path that you're going to be able to prosper and to find your own peace of mind. And pragmatism and Richard Rorty actually was the foundation both of my master's thesis in philosophy, and then my PhD program was in education, and I used Rorty's later writings in there. So it was a life changer, and it was just a function of my constant sense of being a misfit and trying to get words that would describe it. And Rorty gave them to me. And I've been practicing that since I discovered that probably in 1984 when I first stumbled on, 83 or 84 when I first stumbled on. Actually, 1983. That opened up the door for me to become an entrepreneur because I realized I don't have to find a job and I don't have to worry about fitting in. I can be a pragmatist and do the things that work and not worry about trying to fit into somebody else's image of what I needed to be as a human being. Changed my life.
So, Tom, in like one or two sentences, can you summarize what pragmatism means in the world of being a misfit and entrepreneur?
Yeah. So pragmatism is originally developed by American philosophers William James and John Dewey, and then really brought into the modern world by Richard Rorty. Basically is the idea that there was never a time in the evolution of our species that we went from coping with the world to representing it in some absolute way. Right there. So even though we have this wonderful tool that we can use to get by in the world that we call language, it's not the case that, language hooks onto the world in some unique way. It just helps us cope with the world. That's all. That's what it is. And so there's no special organ that humans have that differs from something that other creatures have, that we all have found ways to adapt to our unique niches in the world. And so misfits can continue that process of evolution and find unique niches that they're uniquely capable of prospering in. And there are so many today, and we have such a diverse world that I really think that anybody, regardless of their proclivities, mine is to be a bookish, nerdish kind of person, you can find your way into a life of which you can be extraordinarily proud, and that you are going to be able to provide for your family and your loved ones in a way that keeps you safe and warm and well-fed here in the United States and around the world.
I love that.
So I guess we can wrap up today's topics by remembering the 5 virtues that are essential to being an entrepreneur, and to realize that these virtues are something that you can literally practice every single day of your life, starting with the central virtue of creating value for other people. I do this with my students. I do this with myself. I get up in the morning and I think, how do I create value for other people today? And I have discovered things about myself that I never would have discovered otherwise if I wasn't focused on that as a central virtue. Then honoring your contracts and promises, respecting the value judgments of the market, being resourceful and optimistic, and being resilient kind of fall into place as you are discovering that you're becoming a more powerful person, even if you are a misfit, even if you have this weird thing like I have of being a nerdy writer type of a person. I've written 19 books, right? And I can tell you right now, I haven't got wealthy on my books. It's a function of the things that the books have provided me. It provides me with some credibility. It provides me with introductions to really great people. I've met people, everything from Tony Robbins, who I've had a chance to sit down with and chat, to being one step removed from Donald Trump, even with one of my co-authors actually worked with Donald Trump on a book. So, it just starts connecting you to the world, and you don't have to try to be like those other people. You can be exactly what you are. And if you use that to create value for the people, you will discover that there are opportunities to establish your own venture eventually. And there's nothing more rewarding, in my opinion, than creating value for other people in a manner that they're willing to, in fact, give you little green pieces of paper in exchange for the value that you're creating. We call that money. But what's the difference? If they are willing to give that to you in a transaction, that means that what you have created for them is more important to them than those little green pieces of paper. And there's nothing wrong with that. And so you should be proud of the fact that you are able to create value for people who otherwise would not have the value that you've created. So everything that I've done, when I finally get to a point where people are willing to exchange something of value for the value that I've created, I find it to be one of the most rewarding things in the world. It keeps me connected to humanity, and it keeps me connected to the flow of life, which is constantly changing. So there's constantly going to be needs for entrepreneurs in every possible category that you can think of. So I wish you the best as you explore your own misfit personality in a manner, and maybe in a new manner, as you go about practicing these virtues. And here's the challenge that I'll give to everybody. And not everybody wants to be an entrepreneur. I get that. But here's how you kind of find out, right? So the way you determine whether a virtue is appropriate for you is, number one, you have to try it, right? And then reflect upon it. So here's the entrepreneurial challenge. For the next month, every morning you wake up, when you put your feet on the floor, the first thought that you want to have come to your head is, how do I create value for the people today? And then go out and practice that for 30 days. And if you start to find that your life is changing, then perhaps you want to continue and then begin practicing some of the other virtues as well. If in fact you find it to be something, it's just not for me to express myself in this way, is not a fit for me, like a coat, it's not fitting, then okay, then maybe we need to find another way for you to be a misfit, and maybe you need to be a misfit in a corporation somewhere. I get that, and there are people like that. That's the challenge that I leave to you today, is for the next 30 days, when you wake up in the morning, the first thing that you say to yourself is, how do I go out and create value for the people today? And see if that doesn't begin to change your life. So join us next time when we talk about how philosophy guides and informs. We're going to dig deeper into American pragmatism and other types of things that I've studied in philosophy over the years. But you can also check out my How to Be Entrepreneurial Gem series. This is the Gem experience offered by AnswerSource. And Kate will provide you with a link for that. And I wish you all the best over the next 30 days as you take on the entrepreneurial challenge.